grenades going off. They had made contact. What had run to him was 2 company of Chinese coming down to make an assault on Arsenal. The Arsenal was hit on this side. We loaded up my 3rd platoon on trucks, and we went down through Yoke to Uncle to Yoke. I stopped off at Yoke to report to the battalion commander, Major Noble, and Mort Kaz, who'd been the radio operator relay from the patrol, bless him, said, I'll go with you. And he volunteered. My platoon sergeant had already gotten the platoon pretty far out, and I had to kind of barrel out there and catch up with him. You know, it's one thing if you're going out on a patrol and you might make contact with the enemy. In this situation, you hear the grenades and the burp guns going off, and you know you're going to get into it. And so we got about as, I don't know, this far, this across the rice paddies, and as we approached, the Chinese stopped firing. They kind of backed off. So we were basically in the rice paddies, no cover except for the little berms, you know, between the rice paddies. At that point, all hell broke loose. We were so close to this, but we were close enough. We could hear them pull the pins on the grenade, and we'd hear them pull the thing and yell grenades, and we'd all kind of duck down behind the berm as much as we could. Burp gun shells hitting, splashing up between us. So I threw 2 grenades at where this guy had been, and Mort Katz, the radio man, gave me his grenades, and I threw those, and I think I got him because the guy who was spraying the world up with a burp gun stopped. At that time, the platoon sergeant came up to me and said, you know, sir, I think we got to pull back. We're losing too many of the men ourselves. We're not going to be able to, you know, help out taking these guys back. Reluctantly, we pulled back and came back, and as we were coming back, we brought as many wounded as we could, but we were still leaving a lot of them out there. We looked back, and the company medic, Malcolm Scott, apparently he had dropped in at the rear of my platoon as I was taking it out there. He was still out there, and I ordered him back, and he refused to come, and he stayed out there by himself. Bravest thing I've ever seen, because the Chinese were still all over the area. The firefight was still going on.
I was assigned to Easy Company as a machine gunner. Warren Webster, our commander at the time, came back with a plan to go over to the base of Old Baldy and pick up a prisoner. And his idea was to send 6 men out early in the evening and crawl on the floor of the valley, and then 18 of us were to go out later on and set up around a perimeter. And when Webster and his men got their prisoner, they were to bring him back to us, and we were to take the prisoner back to the lines. And as we went out, we set up our perimeter. And when I set up the first 2 men with their zone of fire and turned around to go get the 3rd man, something caught a gleam in my eye, and I felt the bullet hit my coccyx. All hell broke loose, and we were 18 of us out there, and we were up against a battalion. I called for the medic, and when he came over, he gave me a shot of morphine. Finally, it quieted down, and I called for my assistant to shoot off the flares to give us assistance. Dick Whitson came to assist us, and he assisted by putting up some small arms fire, and then started taking the individuals back. He didn't have enough litters or stretcher bearers to take us all back, so he had to leave me and 3 others out there. And I thought, well, this is the end of it now.
The 2nd platoon, which had been my old platoon, was on Yoke, and they had been told to come down and help bring in the wounded. And I said, okay, we're going back out there. Let's still got guys out there. We did go back out with a part of the 2nd platoon, and Jack Sullivan was the platoon leader of that platoon, and a platoon, or part of a platoon from George Company. We got back out, and finally we heard Scott calling to us, and Scott had been wounded, and he'd built a little fire trying to take care of the wounded, and we still had more wounded that we can take care of. And so Jack Sullivan came back and to bring out some more guys, and I stayed out with him, and we were Every now and then we'd hear a little contact, the little burp gun would go off or something, and we'd fire back. And we still had a lot of wounded. I was getting worried because we were right under the Chinese lines. We started to get worried because the sun was starting to come up. And just about that time, Gorman Smith was the Estuat battalion. It kind of came out through this area, caught up to us, and we then took out the rest of the wounded. And as we were pulling back, the sun was coming up, and we started to get rifle fire from Schnook and Hill 200. And we got about here, and I remember the rifle rounds cracking over our heads and laughing because I thought, hey, we'd fooled them, we'd gotten out.
About 1:30 in the morning, I heard footsteps coming, and I thought, uh-oh, the enemy is coming back again. But then I realized that it was much too loud for the enemy. They picked me up and the other 3 guys and took us back. I think at that time they realized that the other 6 guys were already killed.
I joined Easy Company 1st Squad, 1st Platoon. We were on a patrol. We set up on the lower Alligator Jaw and then moved from there over to the east side of T-Bone Hill. We were to capture a prisoner was our job. I got hit about halfway across that field, and when I went down, I couldn't remember the medic's name, and he had told us not to yell medic, but I yelled medic anyway. Then it dawned on me that his name was Hack, and he came running to me, and also the company commander who was on the patrol at the time. Lieutenant Webster was on my left side, and Hack was on my right side, and they dragged me over to the ditch, and Hack started doing this thing on me. I had, I think it was 18 hits in my leg, both legs. I did not know it at the time, but that was the second day of Lieutenant Webster's command of Easy Company. This was at night. It was, I think, about 11 below zero. It was in the dead of winter. It was organized confusion is what it amounted to, is a lot of yelling going on, a lot of rounds being fired, a lot of mortar rounds coming in, and you could hear people every once in a while, but in the position I was, I couldn't see anybody.
I came back to my bunker, been a long night, got a call from Major Noble, and he wanted me to go back out there with the tanks and clean up the battlefield. The company was really decimated. We'd had really good luck all through October. The battles there had taken very few casualties. Then all of a sudden, in two nights, we practically wiped out the company. Instead of that, Gorman Smith came down as company commander, and I became company executive officer. So shortly after that, I left the company. I was transferred back as a liaison officer. For the action the night that Webster was killed, I was awarded the Silver Star, and Mort Katz, the radio man, received a Bronze Star very deservedly. The one who was shortchanged was Malcolm Scott. His action was obviously so heroic, we just assumed that he was obviously going to get something. He did not. After the war, somewhere time around 56, he did receive a Silver Star. We felt he should have deserved a lot more.
I was drafted in 1952. It was March 1953 when we arrived at Incheon. When we arrived at the 17th Infantry headquarters, I remember the first time that I heard sounds of war, I guess you might say. I could hear artillery way off at a distance. Being a new replacement, this kind of bothered me just a little bit, I guess. You know, I was kind of nervous and kind of scared, didn't know exactly what to expect. I was already assigned to Item Company, the 17th Infantry Regiment. And I knew that I was going to go online either the next day or a day or so after that. So this must have been somewhere in the middle of April. We were told to get out of the personnel carrier and to go up the trenches up to Fort Chop Hill. I was up there 3 or 4 days, and I heard this 088 telephone ring. I believe it was First Sergeant, said, I don't know, but said, I'll find out. He came down the line in the bunker there asking if there's a Walter Bishop in the group. I said, yes, sir. I said, I am. And he said, they want you back down to the 17th Infantry headquarters to take a test to be a wheel vehicle mechanic. I was new there. I didn't know anyone. It was kind of a frightening thing, really, for the first day or two there. But there was a sound there that I remember hearing that I'd never heard a sound quite like it. And I found out later that it was what was known as the Chinese burp gun. And it was so fast that it just made an altogether different sound. And this sound I remember, and once in a while also that they would send up a flare, and of course the flare would light up things. But I thought to myself, I'm going to take a chance because it just can't get much worse from where I'm at the present time, so I'm going to take a chance at him. So in my assignment off through May then, in June, I worked in a service company as a wheel vehicle mechanic. Of course, the month, I believe it was in the latter part of May, and maybe most of June, I did mechanic work there. And I remember up there on the hill, I believe it was about the 6th of July. But I believe it was somewhere in the neighborhood of first 3 or 4 days of July that the companies got hit pretty bad up there. They were doing the repair work on the bunkers. So they called back down to the service company there. There's 2 of us in the company was selected. The other boy was named Hadley, I remember. They said, we need to send you back up on the hill. Said, you need to help them do some engineering work up there. The artillery and the mortar and everything had pretty much torn up the bunkers again. So the engineers up there that we were working with, we were trying to help repair while the other men was trying to do their daily chores. A lot of them where they had caved in, we would have to take our shovels and our tools and clean up where they had shells had come in and maybe where the bunkers had fallen in. Of course, there'd been several battles that went on during this time there. I remember the stench was pretty bad there. And I remember digging with my buddy that had went up there with me. We pretty much stayed together. That we had dug up 2, we believe, the big Chinese bodies. Because the Chinese, they would come in there and they'd overrun the bunker. And the stench was real bad, and I'm not really sure if they were Chinese or not. I never did really find out. Of course, GRS came in and removed these bodies after we had located them. Out in front of the ridge line, of course, on the enemy side or the no man's land down that way, there were barbed wire stretched across and several different strands of wire. Also, certain areas there, they had minefields set up, and you could hear the guns. Mostly, I believe it to be mortar and light weaponry.
But I know it was somewhere around the end of March. I was told that I was going to be in the 17th Infantry Regiment of the 7th Division, and we headed out to an ammunition dump to load up the trucks with ammo. And that night we made our first visit out to Pork Chop Hill. I can't say I wasn't scared, because I was. In fact, I was scared the moment I heard the artillery when we were down in Incheon. And I actually said to myself, what are you doing here? What did you do wrong to find yourself in this position? I had no idea what what it stood for. It stood for Pioneer and Ammunition. And our job was to keep the troops on the line supplied with ammo. The more they used it, the more we had to go out and bring it out to them. The Pioneer part was putting up barbed wire, putting in landmines, trip flares, anything that required something other than what an infantry soldier would do. They said, you mean you're going to go out in front of the concertina wire? And we told them, yeah, that's what we were told. They said, wow, did you guys volunteer for this? Out there, and there were 7 nights that we were out before we were relieved. But on one of the nights, we heard mortars going off, the popping. Well, we were halfway down the hill. We had the concertina wire between us and the top of the hill where our guys were. As far in no man's land, that and still being on the hill. But we heard the shells, we heard the pops, and we froze, but we also started hearing yelling from the top of the hill. And we heard them, the guys were all yelling, "Get out of there, get out, get out." And that the shells were coming up, actually up the hill. And they knew we were there and they were trying to get us. So we all dropped everything we had and we started running uphill. Now I remember running and not seeing anybody. We had just scattered and I discovered I was all alone. So I came to a trench after I got through the concertina wire. I came to a trench and I jumped into it and started running. Now I learned something that night, that if you can't see above the top of a trench and you start running and you're exhausted, you don't know if you're running uphill or downhill. When I got to a certain point, I heard yelling, saying, "Halt!" There were two GIs. And they told me I was down at a listening post, and I had been running downhill the whole time. And I was lucky, I guess, that they didn't just shoot me rather than yell halt. They pointed me out up the right direction, put me in the right trench, and I went uphill, and we joined forces with the other guys up there in their P&A platoon, and they assigned us to a trench on what I assume was the south side of the hill, and we were told to just get down because they had called for a flash pork chop, and we found out it meant that they used various variable time fuses to set off the ammo above the grade. We were told to lay down in the trench with our backs against the back wall and point our carbines out at the top of the edge, of the front edge, so that in case anybody came over, we could shoot them. Because we understood there was like a small force of Chinese that were just probing at that time. And flash pork chop was going to go off instantly. And we heard the most tremendous crashes and booms that we ever heard in our lives. From our position on the back of the hill, we could hear a lot of yelling and screaming and guns going off. We heard machine gun fire. The VT display was probably the best fireworks I ever saw in my life and ever would see. The flashes and booms, and there was shrapnel flying all over the place. And the screaming and yelling, and at the time, I recall they turned searchlights on, and the sky was lit up, and the ground in front of us was lit up, but nobody came up that side of the hill. We did find out later that there was a probe on the north side, and that's what all the screaming and yelling. We made our way and down to the bottom of the hill to wait our ride back. And that was my first sight of dead American boys. There probably were 6 or 7 of them laying in a row, not in the bunker, but outside the bunker. They wanted to get them off the hill. Well, they put 2 of the boys, strapped them on a tank, and they just called out and wanted somebody to volunteer to hold these guys on to make sure they didn't fall off. I never gave it a thought. I just volunteered. And I sat on top of that tank holding these guys who were turning purple. I realized they were dead. Boys that died fighting for their country. And I also realized I wasn't there for the July battle for pork chop.
I arrived in Korea in December of 1952. I was assigned to George Company. I was with them from then until March, when I was out on a patrol. We went out on a patrol to bring back Easy Company, and I got wounded on that patrol for the first time. They were overrun by the enemy, and they had left a lot of wounded out in the valley, so we went out to bring them back. That's where I got wounded by mortar fire. The Chinese dropped mortars in on top of us, and I was wounded in the leg and in the hand.
I was assigned to the 17th Regiment Medical Company, 7th Division. On April the 16th, the word came out that they was expecting a enemy push at Pork Chop Hill area and surrounding areas. About 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, they told us we were moving again. This time it went to the front line. We were moved to just behind the MLR, behind Pork Chop Hill.
The morning of the 17th of April, Pork Chop blew wide open. We were loaded on the deuce and a halfs, They drove us up to the assembly area. It was pitch black out. They unloaded us for deuce and a halves. Then they took us up the road further. They dropped us out of the deuce and a halves. They loaded us up with our ammunition and grenades. And our orders at that time was to fix bayonets that we were going to counterattack Pork Chop. And we left the assembly area, across a small stream that I can remember, and we were about maybe 100 yards up this here like a road going up Pork Chop when the enemy dropped in mortar rounds on top of us and completely almost obliterated us. I got wounded in the back, the chest. In fact, I was wounded twice that day. The same time I got wounded in the chest to start with, and then the next round came in and got me in the back into my legs out there. I was carried off the hill by medics to a forward aid station. The medics that picked me up there, I believe, was Lee Johnson and a medic by the name of Nussmeyer.
The noise, all the activity, there was vehicles going everywhere, people moving everywhere. Then when we moved to the checkpoint, which was the pickup point for the people going to and from Pork Chop Hill, the armored personnel carriers would take troops and supplies to and from Pork Chop. Checkpoint was just ahead of in front of the MLR, but it was between the MLR and Pork Chop. Pork Chop was right just around the hill from Hill 200, and the enemy could see us if we moved from checkpoint just a few hundred yards. We were under enemy observation. Often wondered what a round would sound like. People talk about rounds coming in. Well, just about daybreak that morning, we had our first experience with hearing rounds come in. The first casualties that we helped to haul back to the aid station was injuries from, most of them were shrapnel. There was some from gunshot wounds. There was some from, I'm sure, bayonets. But there was some wasn't too serious, and many had removed limbs or injured limbs very badly. It was when we'd been up for about 2 days with no sleep. It was very, very disturbing to us.
I joined the Army in July of 1952. Arrived in Korea in March of 1953. I was assigned to the 17th Medical Company, and from there I was assigned to Fox Company. They were on the MLR with a part of the company on Outpost Yoke. I arrived on Outpost Yoke in the latter part of March, and we were getting shelled frequently. This lady came over the PA system that we called her Pyongyang Hannah, that says, okay, Fox Company GIs, we know you're down there in the valley. Says, we don't want to kill you. Go back to your lines. And of course, that is a harrowing experience. And I never wanted to go through that again. As Pork Chop activity picked up, we were moved out to a staging area to just before you got to the main MLR by the 155 and 105 artillery bunkers. But as we moved out from the forward aid station and approached Pork Chop, then the enemy forward observer started calling in artillery, and we sustained a tremendous amount of casualties. One I remember in particular was a Lieutenant Ellison that was a platoon leader with the Fox Company, that he was injured bad, and he insisted that I go on and take care of the other people. And just as we got into the trenches, a shell hit close to me, and I fell down the trench, and this person fell on top of me. And as the shelling lightened up, I kept punching him to get up off of me, that I was bleeding. Well, it wasn't me bleeding. It was him, and he was dead. The trenches were, in some places, deep and covered over with timber, with sandbags on top of them, and some was extremely shallow. That if you were walking through there, crawling through there, whatever it may be, you could very well be hit with artillery. It had bodies, both North Korean, Chinese, and American troops just everywhere. The battle was so intense and so many things taking place that we were about to be overrun, or that was a thought. So artillery was called in, our artillery, which was VT. That VT, they called it Victor Terror, and what that amounted to is airburst artillery. And they gave us 10 minutes to get under cover or in a bunker. We had a lot of casualties from that artillery shelling. And when we found the George Company that we was to relieve, I think there was 16 people, either 14 or 16 people from George Company. The rest of them had been evacuated or wiped out. As we went on Pork Chop, this being the first battle, each company, infantry company, had 9 medics assigned to the company. You had 2 per platoon and 1 for headquarters. Well, on my first tour on Pork Chop, I became senior aid man for that company. There was 9 of us went up, and some being killed, others being wounded and evacuated. I was the one that came back to the company.
At that time, I was still a PFC, and after the depot in Pusan, they assigned me to the 17th, still 18 years old, and all of this is a big adventure to me. I didn't know enough to be afraid of anything at that time. When we finally got into real activity, it was on T-Bone. I remember very vividly the nighttime duty there. We would go out on patrol routinely. I forget what the rule was, but if you had a combat patrol, they had to have a medic go with them. I had a bunker in one of the, where I kept my gear most of the time. Okay, while we were on line, I was with the 1st Platoon of Able Company. It was about 10:30 on March 29th in the morning when the shells came in to the location where they were digging out the trench. And after I got there, I was there just in time to catch a mortar. It landed right in front of me. It hit me in the neck, stomach, and leg. I was bleeding quite badly out the neck. I went paralyzed on the left side of my body from the shell that went into my neck. It hit a nerve bundle up there. But I had the urge to go back to my unit. So I told them that I voluntarily requested to return to Able Company 17. And after a few days, they cut orders. It said I was reassigned to Able Company of the 17th. I was very happy to be going back to the 17th. This would have been probably at least the end of May. And, I thought it was a rather neat thing to be able to go back to my unit and join my buddies again. So while they were in the reserve being replenished and restocked, I joined them there. By this time, I would have been the senior medic. The other medic from the earlier battle, of course, had either been wounded or rotated. My assignment was to be the senior medic with Able Company, and I went on up and joined them in that capacity. Early in July, with Able Company in the 17th, we moved back up on line to Pork Chop Hill. When the battle actually began on the night of on July 6th, we were in the bunker, and the artillery shell started falling a little more heavily. And to get from our position up to the main line, we went through an open area of the trench. It wasn't all covered over in the back part of the hill. So we stayed in that bunker when the artillery shell came in. About 10:30 at night, we had grenades thrown into the bunker with us. But we could hear the Chinese talking on top of it. And after they threw in a couple grenades, they didn't bother to come into the bunker, thankfully. So the 3 of us stayed there quiet as little bunnies during that part of the night. We could hear the Chinese out there talking. We didn't want to make any noise to alert them to the fact that we were still alive and that we were even there.
Being born in Europe and not being a citizen, I couldn't listen to the service. So I got drafted in 1952. They sent me to a medical school at Edojima, Japan. And I went to a medical company and then they put me into King Company as an infantry medic. I arrived in the 17th Regiment in March, and the company they sent me to, King Company, was online on Erie and Arsenal. In the first battle of Pork Chop Hill, our company wasn't involved up there. We got involved in the one in July. They took basically they took the whole regiment, and they took basically the whole division to go up there. The 3rd Battalion, which I was in, was up on Pork Chop Hill. Well, when I first got to the aid station, at the collecting station, there was tons of bodies there. My God, it was a terrible mess. They were all covered. By this time, a lot of our company troops were either wounded or killed by this time. But it kept going all day. A lot of artillery came in. An awful lot was coming at the time. So I fired my weapon often, and it went into. We got attacked that night. And we were sent up on top of a hill, another medic and myself, and there were just hordes of Chinese coming up the hill.
I was drafted in the Army on December the 2nd, 1952. Arrived in Korea May 19th and went to 7th Infantry Division headquarters. From there, I was assigned to the 17th Infantry Regiment, Company A. I was assigned to the Rifle Platoon in the 1st Platoon, 1st Squad. Charlie Brooks was my squad leader. And I can remember today that we could look off in a distance with our overhead lights shining back in front of us. We could see the Chinese or the North Koreans, a group were walking, and their hats looked like they had a flashlight on them because they shined. And we just sat there and watched them. At that time, there was no firing going on, no mortar rounds coming in or anything like that. And we observed them in a valley off in the distance from us. To be honest with you, I was very nervous. I didn't know what to expect. But Charlie Brooks, he had been experienced. He had been on the April Battle of Pork Chop, and he said, just do what I tell you. I said, I'll show you, I'll get you out of there alive. Well, on Hill 200, I remember very much that Lieutenant Shea, he worked with the guys. He would show you what to do, tell you what to do. Then he would let you do it. And then he would come by and talk to you, did a good job, but he was a very outstanding officer. On about the 1st of July, I was assigned to go up on to Pork Chop Hill. We were sent by motor trucks for a good distance. We started getting incoming rounds. They had us to unload and go over next to the side of the mountain. So the rounds would go over top of us. From there, we walked the rest of the way across the mud and patties. And it had been starting to rain some then. It was very muddy. And we walked up, I know, a long trail to get up on Pork Chop Hill. Finally, we got up there in the trenches. It was open trenches for a ways back through the company headquarters. And then we were assigned our area. And everybody was assigned their firing spots. Lieutenant Shea assigned me to about 6 South Korean men, and they were digging the ditch, the trench, deeper, so they could eventually cover it up. So he tried to watch them, said don't let them get up over the bank, do any waving, anything like that. Or said if they pick up anything, don't let them put it in their pockets, because you might be fighting them tonight. But particularly on the night of July the 6th, Charlie Brooks told me that I need to get some early sleep because I'd be assigned the late night guard duty and he wanted me to have plenty of sleep. So I went to bed somewhere around sleep in a sleeping bunker, somewhere around 8 o'clock. And then that night, I believe a little after 10 o'clock, I mean, it seemed like all hell broke loose. I mean, I heard incoming rounds coming in, but nothing like that. The ground shook and everything else, and I said, there's something going on. So I got out of there, went down to the squad area, and my squad leader, Charlie Brooks, told me, said, where's your rifle? I said, I left it in the sleeping bunker. He said, go get it, because we need it. We're under attack. So I went down to get my rifle. The sleeping bunker was located next to a Wash Fork in underground tunnels, and I was fired upon by a Chinese or a North Korean. Bam, I got my rifle right quick and I headed back into the squad area. After I got my rifle and headed back to the squad area, part of them has already been hit, and we had moved on down the underground trench to the main firing area where we could look out. I hate to say it, but I had to walk on dead bodies with my own men. Area, and on the other side of our area, we know the Chinese because we could hear them talking. If they got too loud, we'd lob a hand grenade around the corner and quieten them down. And so we were there until the late at night, and we'd be firing out there at the Chinese or North Korean, whichever one they were. But anyway, the day before we was attacked on Port Top on July the 6th. The Chinese, they come with big loudspeakers, a welcome the Able Company to Port Chop Hill. They told us that they were going to take Port Chop Hill if they had to wade in blood to do it. So they sent two divisions on this, Able Company. And I don't think it was only about maybe 2 platoons of Able Company was on Port Chop Hill. I was in the firing bunker, and the Chinese would come up the hill, and they could run faster up that hill across barbed wire, and faster than you could even think about shooting bam, 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 bam. And Charlie Brooks had a Browning automatic, and he fired it till we run out of ammo. I think I maybe had 1 clip left, and it was getting about close to 2 o'clock in the morning when I got hit. I'm sure it was either a rifle grenade or hand grenade. As I remember, there was 6 of us in the bunker. A round come in, go whomp. Everybody looked around, everybody looked at me. And Paul Sanchez, he's out of California. He grabbed me and set me down. And it had blowed my right leg off, below the knee, completely off. Left leg was shattered. From that point, it took me back out into the trench, set me down, and Paul Sanchez, he tied tourniquets on both of my legs, and to stop the bleeding. And then we stayed there for probably maybe 2 something. No, 2 something. Then we stayed there to just before daylight. We was cut off. We couldn't get forward. We couldn't go either way. Enemy on one side and was cut off on the other. We were running low of ammunition. So we talked together, and I was still conscious, knowing what was going on. And Charlie Brooks, he asked us, said, what do you think about what was able to go out to firing range and make it around to the right and go down to the, try to find a company headquarters and get some help back for me, and so they get some more ammunition. So I told him to go ahead because I was no good like I was. So Charlie Brooks, he checked the bandage on my legs, said there was no bleeding going on, and I said, well, my rifle's jammed. How about leaving me what's left of a case of hand grenades? I said, I'll take care of myself here till you get back to me. So at that time, they left, and I stayed there from that night. That was on July the 7th, all day long, all night long the next night. At about 10 o'clock on July the 8th in the morning, before they come in to pick me up. Okay, while I was in the tunnel there by myself, I had no water. I was getting very thirsty. Occasionally I could feel a drop of water coming through the overhead on it, and I'd catch it, raise my head back, and I'd catch a drop in my mouth. I said, well, I know it's not good, it's not healthy, sanitary, but I had to have something in my mouth. My tongue was getting thick, and anyway, it was, I had like I said, no food or water from July the 6th until the morning of July the 8th. I stayed there. I was by myself. Nobody, but just me and dead soldiers around me. occasionally I could hear Chinese or North Korean talking down in the trench in front of me. I had a case of grenades, about half a case anyway. Anyway, I'd pull a pin out of one, I'd throw it down and bounce it off the wall back down the trench the other way, and it exploded, bam. I didn't hear no more out of him. Then one time, a couple of Chinese came in the bunker through the window, was in there yak, yak, yak. So I just pulled a pin on one, tossed it over the sandbags in there, boom. I heard no more out of them. So anyway, I stayed there, and sometime during the next night, now that was just it in the morning part, the next night, sometime during the night, Angelo Palermo, who had been out on a patrol, he came in and talked to me a few minutes. They said he was really teed off because there's nobody there with me. And he said, well, I made my way through. He said, I'm going to go back and get a medic for you. And he went back to get a medic. And like I said, that was sometime on July the 7th. Okay, occasionally while I was there on the ground, I get incoming incoming hand grenades coming in my way, go bam, and sometimes I think there were more concussion grenades than there were fragmentation grenades. And then it was just me and myself and the good Lord. On the morning of July the 8th, I was sitting there, every now and then tossing a grenade down around the bend towards the Chinese. All at once, go vomp, a flamethrower went off of my back, and I hollered, what the hell is going on? Cut that damn thing off. So, heard one of them say, oh, he's one of us, he's all right. So they came in there, I don't know what outfit it was, but they had a stretcher. They got me on it, and off down the trenches we went. I went off down by the company. I remember going to the company headquarters bunker and down to the trenches as a company was coming up on one side of the trench. They were carrying me down on the other. And every now and then it would stop. And when they stopped, here was the guys right in front of me there, and I said, anybody got a drink of water? I could sure use one. Some guy, he handed me his canteen. I opened it up, took me a couple swallows, put the lid on it, handed it back to him. He said, you need it worse than I do. So I kept it, thanked him, and to this day, I wish I knew who he was. Death. Doctors tell me today, different ones I talked to, won't know how I survived that long without being bleed to death. So I should have bled to death within 3 minutes after I was wounded. But I guess the good Lord was looking over me for a good cause down the road. What you're seeing here is results of shrapnel wounds I received on Pork Chop Hill. You can see here the scars here. This ankle was busted up so bad they used screws to put it in to hold it together so it could heal back. And this over here is where it blowed it off my leg off here. And this is one of the more modern day prosthesis. I'm able to snow ski with this one.
When I got back to the company area and rejoined the company, I believe it was late March or middle March, somewhere along in there. The snow had all gone, I remember that. At that time, I could not really get up and run. I just didn't have enough stamina about me at the time. And Lieutenant Smith's driver, one of the drivers had just left, and he asked me if I had a license, which I did, and he said, well, why don't you come over and drive for a while till you get built back up and all. And then one of the Garmin Smith's driver rotated, and he asked me to drive his Jeep, which I did. Lieutenant Smith was a West Point graduate, I believe class of 50. Howard Brown, who was a boy from Tupelo, Mississippi, was also a class of 50, and they knew each other. And when Lieutenant Smith asked me where I was from, and I told him, and he asked me if I knew Brown, and I said, yes, sir, I did. And I said, did you know he got killed in 1950 in the first trainload of troops that went over there? Lieutenant Smith did not know that at the time. When the April, I forget the dates of it, but the April pork chop engagement came, I was driving for the Lieutenant Smith, and we went up on a road, had a convoy of trucks that I was leading. He was in my Jeep, and which went up to a point, I can't remember where it was close to that checkpoint area. But all the troops got out. He told me to lead the trucks back to the area that where they could clear the area. Like he said, to look out for wounded from the Easy Company and all, which I did at that time too. I can remember through the night, it was just like daylight up there with I think it was B-25s from somewhere coming across dropping flares. At the, any instant there was no telling how many artillery rounds being fired from, I could hear them all the way from it seemed like from 8-inch guns down to 105s, and they just kept that up all night long. And then the next morning, I saw Lieutenant Smith and 2 or 3 others from the company coming down the road, and I went over to where they were. At the time, they were trying to bring wounded down off the hill in the APCs and the Armored Personnel Carriers, and I didn't get involved with the actual handling of the wounded that night at all. Lieutenant Smith had gotten hit, I believe somewhere up in the neck area, right along in the ear. He had a bandage up there, and he wanted to go by and get that checked out. Lieutenant Smith left, and I believe there were 2 more before the July incident with the in pork chop. The company went on out of sight, going up across the road and up the hill. But after they started bringing wounded back, I remember one of the first ones they brought back seemed like was our company exec. He had been a master sergeant for a long time. Then it was not too long before the company commander himself came back, and he had gotten hit pretty severely. I remember that. At that point, we were taking rounds in on the checkpoint. I don't know where they were coming from. They were Chinese rounds, and at one time I was outside and was going to do something. Anyway, we started getting some rounds in, and I ducked under a APC that was out there, and after the rounds quit, I got up and left, and the boy asked me why I did that, and I said I was getting out of danger. He said, well, that thing was loaded with grenades. He said, I don't imagine you knew that. The first day it was just noise and everything, and I can't remember whether it was the first or the second day. Mortar Company for Easy Company had set up over at the base of Hill 200, which was to the east of Pork Chop Hill. You went over across the creek and went around the base of the edge, the lower edge of Hill 200. They had set the mortars up over there. Freddie Webb and somebody else said that they needed ammunition, but there wasn't any way to get it over there. A boy named Otto Glander in the company, he was a driver, Jeep driver too, and he and I loaded his Jeep and drove across over to where the mortar squad was, and we delivered ammunition either in his Jeep or my Jeep for quite some time, as much as we could. And then we came back one time, and Freddie Smith came out and told us that y'all don't go anymore, so they just blew the mortar squad up. They had found, I think it must have been somebody over on Baldy or somewhere over there that could see where we were going anyway. After several trips, I think 10, 11 trips, something like that, they started shelling that place and they just put that unit out of the commission. I stayed then at the checkpoint until all my company, all the Easy Company had been relieved. The dead were not being brought down at that particular time, and I can't remember when they started bringing the dead off the hill. I know some of them were brought out, and then after the whole thing was over and we regrouped, they asked me and Sergeant Webb, and I believe it was a lieutenant. I was the oldest, one of the oldest longevity-wise people in the company. And they asked us to go back to Seoul to grave registration to see if we could identify anybody. And we went back there, and that was terrible. They had long tents set up, and the dead were laying in there and just all shapes and sizes, you know, and it was a horrible thing to do. I'll never forget that.
We had all this action up on the line. You could hear all the big guns and all going off, and we didn't know all it was happening, but that happened to be the 17th day of April. And we were hearing the Battle of Pork Chop Hill, the first battle of Pork Chop Hill. I was going to the 17th Infantry, Easy Company of the 7th Division, and that's who we had heard all that battle and all the big guns firing and all the casualties that were coming off of that hill. I would be a platoon leader with the 17th Infantry, Easy Company. There were 3 shaved-tail lieutenants, not actually shaved-tail because they were all ROTC too, but they had been on the ship with me from San Francisco, and we were all assigned to the same company. Easy Company of the 17th had lost all of their officers in the first battle of Pork Chop Hill, and they had lost most of their men. So we had a week or two getting reorganized and getting up to full strength and everything before we got further assignment. I had the duty of training soldiers in, I call it combat readiness to go attack a hill.
January, I think, of 53 that I volunteered and went over to Korea. And from Busan, got onto a train. Bev Reed, who was a light colonel at the time, sat across from me. I knew I was going to the 17th. I was assigned to the 1st Battalion, and I learned there that Bev Reed was going to be my battalion commander. I was put into a Jeep and sent up to Able Company. They're out on Arsenal Erie. And I started walking down there. And all of a sudden I heard ka-chunk behind me. I didn't know what that was. And then I heard another ka-chunk before me, and I realized someone was registering mortars on me. I started running, and I felt like an idiot. Started laughing crazy. Got up there, and my guys who were going to be my guys were all laughing at me too. In fact, I got the nickname the Laughing Lieutenant for a while. And we had what we called Chink Baldy to our right front. And we had the 3 Sisters, which were 3 little hills in a row going from north to south to our left front. And of course, Polkai further to the left. Most of our fighting was at night. We were moving off of Polkai, Arsenal Erie at that point. And we moved back and forth. They took us back in reserve about every 2 or 3 weeks. They shift companies. So we got some time in the rear, and we got moved from hill to hill. Like I think my second hill was Hill 200. Each platoon ran about 4 or 5 patrols a week. When I inherited that platoon, it was down to 24 people, and they were in really bad shape. You know, they had lost their leaders, and I thought they were pretty disjointed.
And we were assigned to a platoon, and I was a platoon leader of Easy Company. After our week or so of reassembling and training, I went up on Hill 347. 347 was the dominant hill in the area. It overlooked Old Baldy and Pork Chop and Hill 200 and 327, but it was the highest hill, 347 meters. It gave a view of anything we wanted. It had observation posts and everything, fairly safe, fairly secure back there. After spending about 2 weeks on 347, we were pulled off, went to the rear to reorganize and assigned to Hill 200, which was immediately in front of 347. You didn't travel to 200 by convoy or anything. You marched because you were in a line of fire of Old Baldy and whatnot from the Chink side. But on Hill 200, I was in the middle of the hill, and we had trenches going everywhere, well fortified. My hoochie, my command post, was where they shot they played all their propaganda. They would come up each night. Our friendly soldiers would come up every night and talk about how nice it is on our side and how we would like to have you join us over here. And about that time, they had us zeroed in, just like an automatic weapon was zeroed in on my hoochie, and they'd stop bombarding that thing and had a strong hoochie, had 8 4x8s and 8x8s and Barack on top of that, but silk would still come through when those rounds hit and all.
The enemy was very much into broadcasting. They'd use loudspeakers. And one of the things that really blew me was that they knew our names. Like when I went up and they said, "Lieutenant Wilcox, welcome. You're going to die here." And that was just not me. That was everybody was getting these comments. And then they had singers who would sing our kind of music on these loudspeakers. And of course they sent up flares occasionally. And it was really, I would say it wasn't demoralizing. It was just kind of surprising. But it was really strange. I remember feeling really strange when I knew my name.
If the Chinese were in the area, you could smell them. We had to run our patrols, and I ran my first patrol from Hill 200. We had the line crossers, the Katusas. We didn't know South Korean from a North Korean, and these people were choking ammunition for us and all, might be choking ammunition for the Chinese the next night, and they might come back the next day. But that was experience on 200, and we came off of 200 to go up on Pork Chop Hill. May the 8th to the 18th, that we had a pretty big skirmish up there. My platoon was on the right flank, and we had our listening post out, and they did a good job, and they let us know that the enemy was in large numbers were planning an attack on Pork Chop Hill. So it was at that time that we could see the enemy coming, and we had a command that we could call flash fires. So I called for flash fire Pork Chop. Pork Chop was surrounded with all the artillery that we had in force, so that they would get anybody that was attacked. And I mean, you could see a round come in and you'd see a hole where the soldiers. They outnumbered us greatly, but flash fire was really what helped us up there.
The whole whole hill was illuminated like daylight. And they were like bees down the bottom of the hill coming up. They were blowing their bugles, and the sound was deafening really by the artillery coming in. And we fired until finally we ran out of ammunition. And at that time, I said to the other medic, I got a very bad feeling. I did have a bad feeling. I said, we're out of ammunition now. We got to get on the cover. And I don't think we were on the cover 3 seconds, and somebody called in VT on position. And my God, I'd never seen so much rounds come down. And VT it seemed like it lasted an hour, it probably was only 5 minutes, but so much steel come down. An ant wouldn't have survived during that attack, but we stopped the attack.
From Pork Chop Hill was a rear of Old Baldy. Old Baldy was commanded by the Chinks. And they had a great big opening at the rear of Old Baldy, and that's where all the people assembled. But they had people coming in, and they would dig trenches at night, and they'd have new apertures open up all over Baldy, and be firing at you the next day. We could see just hordes and hordes of the Chinese, and the one thing that amazed me is the size of them. And I later found out they were Mongolian, and they were a lot larger in stature than the Chinks. It was about a 2.5, 3 day battle, but we prevailed, and we thwarted their attack, and that's when we knew that we had our offense was back in style, that we could stop them, and they couldn't get to 347. During that period of time on Pork Chop Hill, we must have lost 8 or 10 people. I know that during flash fires, our short rounds got a portion of our 4th platoon, which is the weapons platoon, because they were behind 200. They couldn't make it up the hill, but they were in a stationary position behind 200, and I know that we about wiped out our 4th platoon. But during the flash fires and whatnot on Pork Chop, during that action, you could see the number of dead soldiers, enemy soldiers, and I don't have the figure, but it was a great number, and you could see they would recover some of their wounded and whatnot. We had very few casualties on our side compared to what we did. After this skirmish, we had been hit pretty good, and we were withdrawn and sent to the rear to reestablish our combat readiness. And at that time, we stayed back, I guess, maybe to the 1st of June, and we had 15 days, I think, back there, and we were just building up. And this was happened to be about the middle of June, and we wanted to get this thing over. And about that time, it was all the news, all the radios, all the stateside paper. Truce is near, truce is near. And I just thought to myself, how good it would be. And a buddy of mine was in service company, and he had invited me back to play baseball with the battalion team, but we still had a little bit more action on the line, so I didn't get to go. And the rule was that couldn't but one officer play on the team. We had a good 2 weeks rest, and the training that we got, the build up of new people after that skirmish in May. We were combat ready again, and we were assigned the next time to 327. and it was to the right of Hill 200. And I remember I was the executive officer, and then all of a sudden one night, without any forewarning or notice or anything else, we were pulled off a 327. We were called back to get ready for supposedly action of 6-8 July, sometime in there, and we went back and got ready to counterattack Pork Chop. Pork Chop, this would have been the third time that the Chinks had tried to get Pork Chop. And George Company and Easy Company were assigned to go up abreast. We'd walk behind 200 and attack from right to left flank.
I'd been on Pork Chop Hill several times during the time I was there. In July, I think it was the 1st of July, it might have been a couple of days before that, we were behind 200 and we moved up as a company and changed into Pork Chop. I was assigned the leg of the Pork Chop. That's to the west side of, Pork Chop has a round part and a tail.
Then they shipped me up on Pork Chop, and I joined Lieutenant Shea in Company A.
The company headquarters was on the reverse slope of the main portion, and the 1st and 2nd platoons were holding the main portion of the hill. We had what are called final protective fires, where people could use machine guns and rifles in the case of attack to cover the ground so that people almost literally couldn't get through if you kept your final protective fires. And we practiced that, and the guys knew that they could, when we were attacked, they'd lock into their final protective fires. Literally, we could do 360-degree protection if we needed to. We had outposts that we placed every night, about maybe 100, 200 yards out from every position. We abandoned them every morning and went back out to them every night so we could see if there's anybody moving.
The first time I met Lieutenant Shea he was sending out a patrol one morning out on a finger off a Pork Chop to check on a radio that had been hit. The patrol had been hit the night before, and he sent me, a lieutenant, and a sergeant first class and another private. I was the lead man, and we went down through the top of the finger and got down there where the man was supposed to have been fastened up on a cross. And he told us before we left not to try to get him down because they'd already had some men hurt, and a couple of them killed, I think. We got down there. I was leading a patrol, and I walked up on top of the trench. They had a trench dug behind the man that was down there on the cross. When I looked over in the trench, the Chinese were squatted down, and they opened up with automatic weapons and hand grenades. And the first one that got hit was a sergeant. He got hit by a burp gun slug. Then next time, the lieutenant got hit by a hand grenade, and at the same time, that other private got hit in the rear with shrapnel, and I was the only one that didn't get hurt. And we made it back on top of the hill. Lieutenant Shea had us to get another patrol to go back out there and pick up those two wounded. But the sergeant was already dead, and we brought them back in. And I was in the last one to get back in the trench. And when I stepped over in the trench, there's a mortar round went off on top of the side of the bunker, trench, and it covered me up with dirt up nearly to my knees, but I still didn't get a scratch, and I'm real thankful for that.
we knew each other, we trusted each other, and we knew that we could trust our friends. They were all there and they were doing the job. We were under pretty heavy artillery attack constantly, and mortars, and so we spent an awful lot of time under cover. On the night of July 3rd, we were under pretty heavy attack, and it began to be pretty clear that they were hitting us harder than usual. We suspected they were going to attack the hill, and at one point in time, I wanted to make sure. I lost contact with some of the end of my platoon, so I went out to make my rounds to make sure everybody was in position and everything. And about that time, I was getting up to one of my furthest bunkers to the east, and it was really, I got separated from the guy I was with at a corner of the trench. I went around the corner. These Chinese were jumping all over us. It was, I mean, they were leaping across the trench, and they got into it with us, and we got into close combat at that point in time. I turned around, and when I could, I turned around and I started back, and there was Corporal McCovick, who had been with me, and he had his gun pointed right at my face, and I thought, Mac! Later on, I asked him why he hadn't shot. He said, oh, because you were too tall and you had a crew cut. What he didn't know was that the Chinese were taller and had crew cuts too.
When we went down there and I got almost to where the man was supposed to be, well, it was raining real bad, and it had been raining a couple of days. I could make out the shadow of him, but I couldn't tell all that much about him. That's when I looked over in that trench and saw the Chinese squatted down in the trench. Then they started firing. This happened about July the 4th, and it was real dark, and you couldn't tell too much about what you could see.
But we retreated into a bunker, a machine gun bunker, from which I called in variable time. So everybody had to go underground, but it would just murder the enemy that was on top of the ground. We were safe in the bunker, and it's just killed all the enemies around us.
And we was having mortar rounds and artillery falling all the time. And but didn't any of us get hurt this time.
My first real awareness of the enemy was when they started jumping into the trench that I was in. They were coming in masses. I mean, I have no idea. They had youngsters, 13-year-olds in their lines, and they were just, I would guess hundreds and hundreds and hundreds. Somebody told me 2,000, but I don't know the truth. And they were flowing into it. Obviously, we had to protect ourselves and our turf and so forth, and that meant we had to pull triggers and use whatever weapons we had to kill the enemy. Something I don't like to remember, to be honest with you. In that trench, at that point in time, officers had carbines at that time, and I got a couple of rounds off with the carbine, and it jammed, so I had to use my other weapons. I had a .45 and I had a .38 that my dad had given me, and I was using those constantly, and when they ran out, I had to use bayonets and knives. I didn't get wounded at that point, but there were a few people laying around that hadn't been before. Then we withdrew into that bunker, and I stood outside the bunker. We used to keep grenades in like a 30-gallon drum outside in the wall of the trench. I stood out there most of the night throwing grenades at the enemy as I could find them and see them and so forth, until finally I was hit by a grenade and had to go back into the bunker. We were in that bunker for really 2.5, 3 days. Our machine gun was knocked out, but you know what? My guys kept up their final protective fires with rifles after that happened. And it was, my platoon sector held because my guys were a team. They really did. The rest of the hill was pushed off, except for the landing and the aid station down at the foot of the main hill. But my wonderful guys held that hill. I'm the proudest person in the world for them. They were just beautiful people. God bless them. I love them. Dick Shea was an interesting guy. He came into Korea, into the 1st Battalion a little after I did. I don't know exactly when. He was a marvelous human being. I remember him, and he had tremendous leadership skills. I remember at that point in time saying, you know, OCS was a trade school. What he did was a professional school. He could have been a company commander in no time, where I was a pretty good platoon leader. But Dick was not only a good platoon leader or a good officer, but he was also a good person. And he was an artist too. He used to paint or draw, sketch pictures, and would show them to me at times. I admired and respected that man so much. And so obviously did Bev Reed, our colonel.
He was one of the finest officers I'd ever come into contact with while I was in the Army.
After the battle was over and I was back in Korea, Bev and I talked about him, and it ended up with him sending me or giving me some material that Dick had and asking me if I would go back and see Joyce Shea, which I was...
He told me that Lieutenant Shea had been killed, and he said that the way he got killed was they was evacuating Able Company, and he had sent 2 or 3 men around one of the trenches, and that he wouldn't come off of the hill until he went around and found out what happened to them men. And as far as I know, they never did hear from him since.
We couldn't officially tell her that Dick was dead. He was listed as missing in action, but we all knew that he was. I mean, there was no question in our minds that between the VT and the flak and everything else and the overwhelming crush of the enemy, Dick incidentally had fought like a wonderful, wonderful madman throughout the battle. He had tried desperately to get to us, and of course he took his life, and God bless him.
And while I was in the hospital there in Tokyo, I was told that out of Able Company that there was only 8 or 9 people standing when they evacuated.
When I got hit by that grenade coming in that first night, I got pulled back into the bunker, and my guys put sandbags up over the door, because by this time the enemy was very close. We could see them in some of our old positions down the end of the trench. I had 13 holes in me at this point, and my guys were wonderful. I talked with one of them, the medic who had been with me at that time, and he said he could still remember putting his hand in my back and feeling the bones. And believe it or not, I can still remember feeling his hand on my back. We were constantly in prayer, incidentally, and reading from a little Gideon New Testament all the time. At one point in time, when our machine gun had gone out, a grenade landed on what we called wire. It was like a fence wire that we had over it to keep grenades off. Grenade hooked onto the wire, and I could see it there, and I remember saying 1,000, 2,000, and it got itself up and fell away and exploded harmlessly. We knew that God had saved our lives that night. We stayed on that hill for another 2 nights until we were pulled off, till the Charlie Company, I think it was, that came up through my platoon position and started the recovery of the hill.
We got there about 3 o'clock on the 8th, and the Chinese were already in the ditches, in the trenches, and everything, and they had the upper hand. They had the high parts of the hill, so they were rolling those potato smashers down the hill 10 at a time. They had some artillery fire coming in, but it was those potato smashers that were hitting us with shrapnel when we were attacking that hill. We got up halfway and our men started falling out. We lost a good percent of those going up that hill. When we got to the top, when we got to the trenches, we found that what we had planned on being our protection was a detriment. They were closed. We couldn't get in the trenches. So that left us shooting ducks for anybody that was in the trenches. And they were loaded down with wounded and whatnot that we had been trying to carry in. One place, in the same trench, you could hear the Chinese on one side. There's a big barrier between us and the Chinese. And you could hear them talking. And here we were trying to get our soldiers back to the aid station. We didn't realize at the time that both George Company and the Easy Company were getting casualties they just falling out everywhere. I know Easy Company lost 3 officers, and I was wounded, but I stayed with them, and I got into trenches, and it was a mess. And I promised the good Lord, I said, Lord, you get me out of this mess, and I'll be yours forever. I did not realize that I was wounded until I saw a little trickle of blood in my hand, and I didn't go to the aid station. I helped get the wounded in the trenches, and it was awful, the number of casualties that we had, and we were actually walking on dead soldiers in the trenches just to get the ones that were wounded back to the aid station.
During the Battle of Pork Chop Hill, that last one, the company, had 80% casualties. My guys held their ground, and not one of my people died in that. We had wounded, and mostly I think that was shrapnel, but they were in pretty good shape when we came off the hill. That's not so of the rest of the company, I'm sorry to say.
That night, I got back to the aid station, and I went to sleep. Now, believe it or not, you get so exhausted that you can go to sleep in action in a battle such as that.
We had an assigned group. Dick Inman, who was a West Pointer, and a patrol were sent out through my platoon sector that night of the first attack. And of course, Dick took his patrol out. We kept in radio contact as long as we could. And when they really hit us, overwhelmed us, he, I guess, died in that. That's the only loss we had. And they went down to the forward slope of Pork Chop Hill. I don't know exactly how far. I believe their mission was to know if the enemy was moving on us so that they could warn us. And I think the enemy attack was so overwhelming and so fast that he didn't have much chance to do it to get back.
And I was waiting in a bunker on the bottom of the hill when the Chinese attacked. I spent the rest of the night on July the 6th in the battles with the Chinese down out of that bunker. And I got hit. We fought all during that rest of the night and that next day. And I was hit about 8 o'clock on the 7th. And it's about 10 o'clock the next morning before I got out of the bunker. That when they attacked that night, they started playing bugles and playing music. And they was talking on a loudspeaker telling us that everybody on Pork Chop, they were going to kill all of us, and trying to scare everybody, which I got scared. And then before that next morning, they started attacking. That would be on the morning of the 7th. And we fought all during the next day. And they had overrun part of the positions and got in the trenches with us. And they was dead all up and down the trenches. And but I couldn't get out of the bunker because they were throwing hand grenades up and down and rolling down in the door. About 8 o'clock on the night of the 7th, I got hit. First time I got hit was in my left arm, like to blew it off. The medic that was in the bunker with me, he done first aid to me, and then they kept throwing, and I threw 3 or 4 or 5 hand grenades out before they exploded. And then I had another one to go off, and it hit me in both legs, and then I didn't pass out then, but sometime later, about 2 hours later, they threw one in there and it went off, and it exploded, and it hit me in the face. When it done that, well, it knocked me out, and I don't remember anything until the next morning about 10 o'clock. They was putting me on a personnel carrier. They was taking me out of the bunker.
I was at the aid station. I had gone to sleep on one of these stake beds with combo wire run between them, and I woke up, and here was a Chinese standing over me. And first thing I thought, I'd been captured, but it wasn't. He had been captured. He was wounded, and he had been captured. During the night, we spent our time trying to figure out what to do next, and the colonel wanted to send me off the hill with my wounded hand, but I said no, I wanted to stay, and so I went back. I don't remember exactly, but it was somewhere around the aid station that I got hit a second time and then a third time. One time in the leg and one time in the buttocks. And so the colonel wanted me airlifted off, and so I got on Army personnel carrier, APC, and they carried me down to where the confident pad was, and I got on one of those things, and sure enough about died getting back to the MASH hospital, tied underneath one of those things with it propping up overhead. I landed back there, and I found out I had superficial wounds of the hands and thigh and the buttocks. I took time to write my mother because I knew that the Army would notify her that I had been wounded in action. And before I went to the aid station, before I went to MASH, I wanted to be sure that that letter was mailed. Everything was in chaos. Nobody knew who anybody was and everything. And of course, it was as many chinks on the hill or more than there were U.S. soldiers. So we had to make a decision, and the decision had to come from high, but they had asked us what we thought about staying the scene and seeing what we can have. I did not see us in any way, shape, or form staying on that hill and losing the remainder of our personnel just to say that we won the battle. So we came off of the hill, and we left a lot of equipment. We left a lot of soldiers and whatnot, and we finally got most of our soldiers off. And all this happened between the 10th and the time I was in the hospital till about the 20th or 21st, and the armistice was signed on the 27th of July. And hey, nobody wanted to be the last person up there. Nobody wanted to be the last person killed in that skirmish or war or what they want to call it. But that's what it felt like, and I guess we were lucky to get off of that hill without losing everybody we had. During the action on Pork Chop Hill primarily, I was awarded the Silver Star for gallantry in action. I had taken over for the company commander. There were a lot of heroes on Pork Chop Hill, and there were a lot of awards to be written up and whatnot. And being one of the officers that were able to stay with them. I had a hard time judging and deciding who should get awards and who shouldn't. And I know that it's like choosing an all-star football team. Somebody's going to be left off, and that was a hard thing to do. But I was awarded the Silver Star and a Purple Heart with oak leaf cluster. That means I was wounded more than one time.
They gave me a Silver Star, and I've never felt I earned it. I've always felt that I was just doing my job. But they gave me a Silver Star, and what I'm proudest of, oddly enough, is the Combat Infantryman's Badge, because I earned that. At least I know I did. But as far as Silver Star is concerned, who am I to say?
I value my Silver Star, being third highest ranking gallantry in action medal that you can win, and especially still living. When it came to these awards and all, we knew the officers and we knew the enlisted men and whatnot, but we might have left out some people that really deserved to be rewarded with a Silver Star, Bronze Star, or whatnot. But it's hard to know everybody, and we were on the move most of the time, and we just didn't get to know people that well. I got to know my soldiers more in the rear than I did when we were on line. I just know one thing: you keep all of them on your side, because second lieutenant is very vulnerable in the Army. He has to command his troops and get things done and keep morale and build morale and make a soldier feel good about himself. And let me tell you, the main medal that I like about the Army is the Combat Infantry Badge. That means it takes 30 days in action in combat zone to win the Combat Infantry Badge. And that's a medal that everyone who wins it deserves it.